Hey there. Hey, Kelly. Hey, guys, let me know if the sound is okay, and then we'll get started. Hey, Jill. Sound good to go? Perfect. So, last week we talked at length about identifying who's coming through and about giving evidence in a spirit link. And part of your homework was to go through the process of connecting with a spirit loved one and giving evidence for a partner. So we ended with that, and I just want to kind of open up with, does anyone have any questions about how we ended with the homework on connecting with spirit, identifying, and then bringing through evidence? Hey, Denise. So any questions about that, any troubleshooting, anything around that you want to look at before we start into the message? Hey, Thomas John. Okay. So if you still have those questions, you can bring them through and we'll kind of jump back and address them, but I did want to get into the next portion of what we've been talking about. So we've learned to disconnect from the personal mind. Then we've learned to shift our awareness to a spirit perceptive state. We've talked about then identifying who's coming through and the many ways in which we identify who's coming through. And then we talked at length about evidence and bringing through evidence. And then you kind of move into the message portion of the process. So what constitutes the message? Well, the message can be a variety of different things. Sometimes the message is based in guidance. Sometimes the message is an apology. I get a lot of that. I get a lot of apologies. Sometimes a message is a validation of signs, whether it be the coins or the butterflies or the blue jays or the cardinals or the song that came on the radio or the thing that you saw out of the corner of your eye and you know, when you were thinking about your mom and you weren't sure. So lots of times spirit will come through to validate certain signs and experiences. Other things that can be part of the message, part of the reason that the soul is actually coming through, is encouragement. To keep someone motivated. You know, obviously when we're connecting, when we're bridging the realm of life and death, we are doing so out of this space of love. And so sometimes love is simply the reason. Love is always the reason at its basis. But we come through in those ways. We come through in those avenues of love to bring encouragement. Sometimes, and you'll get this, not as much with those who are recently departed, but maybe a little bit more so with people who've been in the spirit world for longer periods of time, you'll get philosophy. It's you know, we have the opportunity to grow and be wiser from the spirit side of life, and so we learn and we are capable of seeing things from a broader perspective. We're capable of seeing the forest through the trees, especially with certain things that we weren't able to in life. So a lot of times a soul will come through, and we talked about the importance of bringing the personality through as we remember it, and then as the reading continues we can sort of talk about how I've changed, how I've grown, what I've learned since I've crossed over. Sometimes, and not always, sometimes because in spirit time is different, they will have a bit of a clearer view of what lies ahead of us than we can. And so you may get elements of prophecy or prediction, although we primarily tend to think of those as more or less occurring on a psychic level. Those absolutely can be given to us from spirit people. That being said, it does not negate choice. It does not mean that spirit told me this, therefore it's set in stone. Spirit could tell you that you're gonna buy a house in March, but if you don't go and look at real estate magazines or call about a house, well, you're not going to get the house. So that doesn't mean that we are exempt from doing the work, but spirit can see, further down the horizon oftentimes than we can. And a lot of times too, spirit will come through as part of what the message is, with what I call circumstantial evidence. And so, or you could kind of see this as an outgrowth of emotional evidence. So oftentimes in evidential mediumship, what we're looking to bring through after we've identified who our communicator is, we want those concrete facts. We want those things that can be validated in the moment. We want those things that can be confirmed right away, that lets us know beyond the shadow of a doubt that who we think we're communicating with, that we are actually communicating with. However, and so that's more factual evidence, which is good. We need that to give credence to this idea of survival. But sometimes, even though it's not true evidence, perhaps in the eyes of a spiritualist, you'll get what I call emotional evidence. And emotional evidence is more messages and validations of how a person felt or how someone in the living feels. And the reason that that's a little bit on the iffy side is because, oftentimes feelings are subjective. Emotions are subjective. So you could say, in regards to the communicator, this person felt really down before they passed. Well, maybe that's true, and maybe someone knows that, but maybe they didn't communicate that. So that's one of those things where it's not as concrete that can be validated in the moment. But depending on the circumstances, it may hold a lot of weight. This person always seemed very optimistic on the outside, but inside they always felt, very insecure. May be very true. And sometimes a person can hear a piece of emotional evidence, and that's what really lets things click into place, even more so than more of the factual-based evidence. And so sort of an outgrowth of that emotional evidence, what we might call like circumstantial evidence, not in a forensic sense, but or a legal sense, but in a mediumistic sense, it's when souls will come through and communicate events that have taken place since their passing. And even though it's not about them, it's not about their life, it's about the person that's sitting there in the physical, in the living, why that can be so impactful and so important is because it shows us that even though our loved ones' physical bodies are gone, that they are still a part of our life experience, that they're not just in some holding tank or some lobby in the spirit world waiting for us to get there, that they're still active participants in the experience. I remember a few years ago, I had a mother bring her daughter in, and for the mom, we had connected with the husband that had passed, and she wanted to bring her daughter in to have a conversation with me. And so I was familiar with his vibration a little bit. He came in really quickly, and the first thing that his dad was showing to me was these traffic cones. And so I was like, so okay, your dad's here, and he's laughing, and he's like telling me to tease you about these traffic cones. Well, she had just come right to my office from her driver's test, and so her dad was giving her all sorts of shit about her driving, but it illustrated the fact that, again, I'm not just pulling memories and thoughts and feelings from some sort of field, but that spirit are still active participants in our daily life experience. They're still with us. We are their heaven. That's why they're around us. So it's not just a place, it's not just a state of mind, it's with us. We literally carry them with us where we go. And so even if they're not hanging around 24/7, they're still abreast of what goes on. So a soul may come through and acknowledge the baby that was been born, or the wedding that they couldn't attend to in physical, but that they were there from spirit, or that they attended a graduation, or to wish someone a happy birthday, or to wish someone, a happy anniversary. And oftentimes those are the things that mean a lot to people. Now, when it comes to the message portion, that's where we're kind of shifting gears a little bit, because when we are in the identify and sort of evidence stage of a spirit link, we tend to receive things, mostly, not always, but more often it comes through in a way that's more literal. What you see is what you get. Save for maybe a little room for interpretation, depending on the systems that you've set up with your guides and helpers that work with you. However, when you begin to shift into the message portion of a spirit link, that's when we can kind of move back into more of the symbolism of what they're communicating, very much in the way as when we were sort of building our own guide links and building up our own language sort of vocabulary bank, when we were doing more psychic exercises and more of those spirit guide processes. And so they may literally show you, a blue plaid shirt, and literally show you that they drove a Ford Ranger, and literally show you September on a calendar, and you can kind of interpret what those things mean and kind of put them together for the person. They can identify or verify those facts, and then you will start to feel a little bit of a shift. Usually what happens in the beginning is it's very much evidence, message, because you're working through a system that you set into place. Over time, as things evolve, you'll find that you're able to kind of bounce back and forth between evidence and message more smoothly, because often the message can be taken from the evidence, and I'm going to talk about that more in a second. So you've identified these things from your spirit people, and when it's time to kind of shift into the message portion, you will feel a distinct shift in energy. Either the evidence will begin to slow down, the communication becomes quieter, you might feel a change in the power that's there, and that lets you know, okay, the spirit link may not be here for an incredibly long amount of time more. I need to understand what the reason for this person is coming forward. So the reason at its core is always love, but there's some sort of message, there's some sort of communication here. And so it's often as simple as asking them mentally, what message do you have for so-and-so? And that's where they may talk about, I see that you've been having a hard time at your job. Please stick it out. We know that, you've gotten married, and I'm sorry that I couldn't be there, but I saw it and you looked beautiful, or whatever it may be. And when that happens, you may get, depending on how your channels work, and as I've said, the systems you've set up with your guides, you may get it in literal sense, or a sense of knowing, but for a lot of mediums, it comes down to interpretation, because most of us, myself included, see and feel more strongly than anything else. If you're lucky to be incredibly clairaudient, they just might say, blah, 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 and you can relay that verbatim, but for a lot of us, there's more of an interpretation process when we get into the message portion. And so I want you to think back to when we were doing a lot of the work involving symbolism, and we talked about evolving symbolism. So you may get your symbols, you may see the heart, or whatever it is, and sometimes it's just like, I see this, I know from repetition that it means that, and I can deliver the message. But I often find too that the message is illustrated when we use that symbolism that we allow to evolve. So we talked about, I think before we did like the blanket of your relationship. Well, maybe next time your symbol for the relationship is represented by the boat, and then spirit shows you one person on the boat. And so does that mean that spirit is communicating, hey, we understand that you're feeling alone in your relationship, and maybe the waters seem a little bit choppy, but the sky is clear. So that's Spirit's way of saying, we know that we're having trouble with your relationship, or that you're having trouble with your relationship, but we want you to just wait it out, because the water might seem choppy now, but the sky is clear, and we see a bigger boat coming in the distance that has room for both parties on the boat, room for both people in the relationship to be what they need to be. And so, again, it's like when we shift into the message portion, we have to take into consideration a little bit more of the interpretation, because it's communicated in more of a symbolic, archetypal way, as often the psychic impressions are. As opposed to more of the literal way. But as I said, you may get a lot of literal things, but you need to be open to understanding your symbology, and that's where your guides and the systems and the symbol banks and the concept exercise that we did with guides earlier is so important, and that's going to come in, because that's where they really step in. Because your guides, we talked about in the old days when people worked with the gatekeeper, the communicator communicated to the gatekeeper communicated to the medium communicated to the sitter, and how that's an outdated way of working. And so if we're communicating directly with Spirit, the guides there supporting the process, helping the Spirit if they need to communicate a process. But oftentimes it's the guides who we work with who help get the message through even more so. Or if we're having, because ideally, if we're working mediumistically, our link is with Spirit. But because you're talking to that person, you can't help to some degree, even if it's a very, very small degree, have a psychic link with the sitter. And so on a subconscious level, you might get a psychic link into some aspect of that sitter's life. And that thought psychically comes to mind. And then your guides may put some input in there, and while we're holding that, then Spirit, even though they weren't really the ones who brought it up, may sort of throw in their 2 cents about that particular issue, or that's where a message comes in. You pick up that they've been considering changing jobs on a psychic level, but you have that mediumistic link to the Spirit communicator, and because you're having that thought in your mind, and your guides are aware of that, and they're working with that energy, then your loved ones, because they're in that space where they can see a little bit further ahead in the horizon, say, we know you're struggling with your job, but maybe you should just wait, just hold it out, just stick it out a little bit longer. So that really is, there's not a lot to it as far as the mechanics. We looked at like the mechanics of mediumship, the mechanics of symbolism, the mechanics of setting up systems with our guides, and the mechanics and systems that come into play when it comes to identification and evidence. But really, when it comes to the message, moving into that next step, while remembering those systems we've set into place, is as simple as, why have you stepped forward? What have you come forward to say? What have you had come forward to communicate? We went through the evidence because we have to prove who's coming through, and it proves to the person the survival. But now we know who's coming through. We've given sufficient evidence of survival. Why are you here? You have the opportunity to speak to your loved one in a way that they never thought that they would. What do you want to say? And it might even help to think about, when you're thinking about practicing message work, if you had the opportunity to see one of your loved ones that have passed away for 5 minutes, you have 5 minutes with this person that you miss so dearly, what do you want to say in the 5 minutes? And oftentimes, while the evidence is so important, the message is the most healing. Because if you thought about it, and someone said, okay, you can see your mom again, but you only have 5 minutes. Well, you're not just going to want to go into, the technical things, because you have 5 precious minutes. You want to speak your heart to the person. So think about those things that you would want to communicate to your loved one that's in spirit, and those are probably the types of things that they want to communicate to their sitter. Well, it's the medium sitter, it's their loved one. So, apologies, acknowledgments, encouragements, guidance, advice, comfort, direction, like I said, validation, and sort of that circumstantial emotional evidence context. Now, we always do homework, right? And last week your homework was to practice getting a spirit link, identifying to the degree that you can, and then evidence. your next sort of chunk, and if you want to work with the same person at this particular juncture, I don't care, but your next homework between this week and next week is practicing once again linking, identifying, bringing through, I would say, 3 or 4 good pieces of evidence, but then just adding on the additional extra part of why have you come forward? What does your heart wish to speak to your loved one? And just being open and listening. Now, a little bit earlier, I talked about how the more that you get comfortable with the process, it's not going to be like this checklist where you're just moving through, disconnected with the personal mind, shifted my spirit perception, I've identified a link, I've given evidence, I've given a message. You know, it's going to be less mechanical. And we talked about the importance of really blending and breathing that person to life and painting the picture of who they are, not just who they were. So, oftentimes, when we are giving evidence, the message is in the evidence. And what I mean by that is there are going to be certain pieces of evidence that might stand out to you that seem a little bit more complex, or that seem to have a little bit more dimension to them. And some pieces are just pieces that we give, we validate, and we don't think twice about. And sometimes it's those pieces of evidence or evidential things that we've communicated that stick with us, or we still have in our head as we're going, that a message can be symbolically taken or drawn from. And I'll give an example of this. A couple years ago, I was doing an expo in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I was doing a gallery, a spirit gallery. And I'm up in the front, and the audience is, you know, in front of me. And I linked to a person in the back, a gentleman in the back whose communicator, I believe, was an uncle. But one of the big things that he used to not only identify, but give evidence is that he was a pilot. And even though there were other pieces of evidence that came through, that image of the plane, of the sense of flying, that brought my attention to that particular spirit communicator in the first place stuck with me. And so as it came time to move into the message portion, that moved into the forefront of my awareness once again. And so a big part of why are you here, what did you come to communicate, was the fact that in the same way that as a pilot you have to know the controls and you have to be able to navigate turbulence, that this spirit communicator was very much acting as a helper. To help this person navigate the turbulence of their life. And so when you have those pieces of evidence that really seem to be highlighted and stand out, go back to that and say, thinking with my symbolic mindset, what message can be extracted from this as I look at it with the influence of having a link with this particular spirit communicator and letting them influence how you interpret the symbology of that particular piece of evidence. Does that make sense, you guys? So another thing that I want to talk about is the importance of the home circle. So when I think about my own mediumship, some of the best sittings that I've ever given, some of the best connections that I've ever had, are when I was sitting in a development circle, a home circle, on a daily basis. And not a daily basis, on a regular basis. And I've sat in 2 circles. The one circle we sat together for about 5 years, and it was geared towards mental mediumship. The other circle I sat in, I sat for about 1.5 to 2 years, give or take. There was some change in members, and that was geared towards physical phenomena. But every Tuesday in the afternoon, it was the mental circle, and in the evening, it was the physical circle. And that went on for years. And first off, well, what is a circle? Well, a circle is simply, you don't literally have to sit in a circle, although most circles do. It's the coming together of people to sit, build power, and work on their own development with each other. And when we talk about things like power and building power, development is often accelerated when a person sits in circle on a regular basis. You don't want to sit daily, that's too much. And it's for two different reasons. One, you're having the opportunity to practice, but two, you're sitting in group energy. And it's the analogy of, if I don't want to use that analogy because I don't want to jinx myself. It's the analogy of, if I had a boulder in my front yard and I wanted to move that boulder to my backyard. If I had 5 people assisting me in pushing the boulder, I'm probably going to get somewhere a little quicker than if little old me has to try to push that boulder by myself. So it's a group power that builds and develops us when we sit in the environment, when we sit in the atmosphere of a circle. Now, there are 2 types of circles. Both have pros and cons. The first type, and the most common type of circle that you'll see at metaphysical centers, churches, spiritualist places, is the open circle. And the open circle it's open to the public. There is not a commitment as far as you have to be here all the time. It's simply a come as you are sort of environment. And it's good to see, is this a right fit for me? It's a good thing to kind of be able to practice your, sensing, stretching your senses and your intuitive exercises. And people can really develop, under the right circumstances in an open circle. The downside to open circles is that there is no set attendance. And one of the big elements of a circle that is so incredibly important is harmony. Because if you don't have harmony, it doesn't matter how long you sit, you're not going to get anywhere. Nothing's going to get accomplished. The energy is not conducive. And so in an open circle, it's hard to get comfortable if you don't have the same faces all the time. And at the same time, with an open circle, you might not like the faces that are there. If you don't have that, if you don't have that harmony, you might not like the person who comes on Tuesdays and their energy annoys you. Well, you don't have the right to tell them they can or cannot come. It's an open circle. It's open to the public. So the other thing that you often get with open circles is you get less people who are committed to their development. And sometimes you will attract needy people who either, one, just want to tell their story because they feel like they need to be validated or uplifted in some way. And so it becomes less about the exercises, the practices, the spiritual energy, the intent. It becomes less about building the energy and more about, I want someone to listen to me talk. Whether it's venting, getting help, emotional stuff, or some people just like to tell their stories because they think their self is so great. And then the other thing you do is you get people, it attracts people because they're usually free and open to the public who are just there in the hopes of getting a message. They're not there to contribute anything to the circle other than hopes of receiving some sort of free reading. That's the downside. Now, preferably, what you would want to find is a closed circle. So a closed circle is not open to the public. Usually you have to be invited or welcomed into the circle by someone who is in charge or the circle as a whole. And they're usually smaller. They usually consist of the same people sitting in the same places at the same time on the same day every week. And they're sitting to build power to develop those spiritual gifts. That's unfoldment. We talked about the difference between development versus unfoldment. You really get that essence of unfoldment in a closed circle. Now, if you are in early stages, closed circle can be good at first, but if you're really sitting for more of mental mediumship, you may become all too familiar and you're wanting to practice, but then you become all too familiar with the sitters and their spirit people, and so you're still getting much benefit from sitting in that group power and allowing spirit to unfold you, but maybe you're not getting to engage the intellectual part of it as much. However, if you are confident in knowing that you can do that and you want to really evolve and develop your mediumship to the degree that it can go, sitting in a circle on a regular basis, even if it's not geared towards mediumship in a mental way, even if it's geared towards healing or geared towards just meditating together or geared towards the development of physical phenomena or geared towards trance, it's going to deepen your connection. You can't not experience the benefit of it just from being in the presence of the familiarity that builds on a weekly basis. And so there is something that I actually wanted to read to you, which is a quote that I loved. So one of the most well-known, well-tested, phenomenal direct voice mediums of the past was Leslie Flint, is Leslie Flint. He's still a medium, even though his physical body's not here. Leslie Flint's gift was the gift of direct voice, which meant that he was a physical medium. You would sit with him in seance conditions, and the voices of your loved ones would come through in a physical, objective, auditory way, kind of like a telephone. You could have full-blown conversations with them. And in one of his seances, one of the communicators was a medium, a British medium by the name of Estelle Roberts. Now, those of us who are involved in the spiritualist world will often hear about Gordon Higginson and the standard of work that Gordon Higginson achieved in his life, being that he was an efficiently developed mental, physical, and trance medium. He did all of those aspects of mediums, and he's often held to the golden standard, or as the golden standard of what ideally everyone would love to be able to accomplish. However, Gordon himself thought the same way about a British medium named Estelle Roberts. Again, gifted mental, trance, physical. And it was in one of these seances from Leslie Flint that Estelle Roberts came through, and the message that she brought through, this is just a small outtake of that particular seance, which is on the internet. You can find many of his seances on YouTube, hours, literally hundreds of hours of them, and listen to them for yourself. But this one I thought was incredibly timely in Estelle Roberts communicating the importance of the home circle, or a circle of some sort. But back in the days before television and things of that, people used to sit in their parlors, and we didn't have the distractions then that we do now. So I wanted to read for you what Estelle communicated through the agency of Leslie Flint's mediumship. She says, "I only wish people would realize this. We all sat, most of us, for many years in home circles. It's only in the home circle that you can find the peace and harmony and tranquility that makes communication a reality. Mediums may be born, invariably they are, but it takes time to develop, and you must supply the right atmosphere and conditions. And yet I do know, of course, in my own case, at times in the early years, it wasn't always possible to get the ideal conditions, but nevertheless we stuck it out and we developed. You know, all of the great mediums of the past who were so dedicated sat for years to develop their power. It didn't suddenly happen, you know, and it's the guides that developed them. No one else can do it. If I hadn't had Red Cloud, who was her primary control, and if the other mediums hadn't had their particular guides or helpers to guide them and instruct them and develop them, there would not have been the mediumship that we used to know. But you know, the basis is true. Spiritualism is the home circle. I would like to see more interest aroused in the development of mediumship in the privacy of the home circle. You know, there's no doubt about it that spiritualism came to the fore through the agency of people who sat and developed their power in their homes. I know that times are different and perhaps more difficult, but I think there must be a return to the home circle where people have faith and trust in souls who come to them from our side of life, who will develop them and use them and make it possible for them after a period of training in the right environment. For them, later to go out and spread the gospel. And I want young people, so young people listen, to realize that if they want to develop, if they want to be mediums, there is only one place, in my opinion, where they can hope to develop in the way which they should. And that is in the privacy, the quietude, the peace, the tranquility, and the harmony of a small group of like-minded people in the home. It can't be done in any other way, I don't think. So, if you do not have access, because I get this a lot, I don't live near a spiritualist church, I don't live near a metaphysical center, I don't know of any classes. If you don't have, access to a home circle, there's nothing that says that you can't start one. And if you are interested in starting a home circle, there are many, this is essentially a home circle. It's a virtual home circle, but we're all coming together in virtual space. Nicole, again, you just mentioned video circles. Lots of people are using Zoom. Spirit is not dumb. They aren't unwilling to change with the times, and so if you want to try working in a virtual way, we can absolutely build power and do so in a virtual way. However, if you are interested in starting a home circle, all you need is 2 or more people. And there's a really wonderful book, probably one of the better books on mediumship that's out there, by Gordon Smith, called Intuitive Studies, that makes a wonderful guide. This book that we've been going through, To Touch the Soul, is a wonderful guide. There's so many different lessons and courses that you can find and use that if you don't have a developed medium to lead the circle, where you can all actively be your own instructors and share sort of the responsibility of what you're doing. The most important part of it, it doesn't matter of, do I need to do this exercise? Do we need to do that exercise? The most important thing is that you're coming together with the intent. And if you come together with the intent, and if you sit in the power, Spirit will develop you. You will begin to unfold. But we can't have expectation, because expectation leads to disappointment. And we can't be in a rush, because when it comes to mediumship, it's turtle in the hair, or tortoise in the hair. There are some people who are, especially those who have that natural knack, that are going to be like the hare, and they're going to take off, and they're going to think that they got it all down pat, and those are the people whose ass are going to get bitten later. Be the tortoise. Take your time, because remember, it's not about speed, it's not about quantity, it's not about how fast I'm getting to the finish line. It's about quality, because you are being of service to the spirit world. You don't want to be a half-assed medium. You want to be the best, most rounded, most authentic, most grounded, most ingrained, most integrated medium that you can be. This also leads me to another point, which is something that's actually very personal to me. So, I turned 30 in January. I know, right? I don't look it. But I turned 30 in January. And I started reading at psychic fairs when I was 16. So, for nearly 15 years, I've been working. And when I was living out west for a while. I moved out west in my early 20s. When I came back in 2012, prior to that, I knew, I had moments, I had episodes of spirit communication. I knew that it was something that I could do. I was not, where I needed to be with it. It wasn't something that I was really comfortable with. When I came back here in 2012, I had a person contact me. My entire life had been flipped upside down. I didn't know, my ass from a hole in the ground. And so the only guidance I kept getting from Spirit was do what you know, which was working for Spirit. And I had a woman contact me. She said, I lost someone. I want to set up an appointment with you. And I said, listen, I don't know that I'm going to be able to be any good for you. I'm willing to try. It's not necessarily my forte. And I went to her house, and I sat with her, and I had the most profound connection with this woman's partner, probably to this day, one of my better sessions. That went on for about an hour. And from that point forward, the mediumship really kind of began to come to a forefront, and the psychic element, not that it was less important, but kind of stepped to the side a little bit, and more people, as I became known for having sort of that mouthpiece for the spirit world, started to come forward specifically looking for that, as to where I didn't like when people came specifically looking for that before, because I was not well versed as I could be in it. And so really from 2012 to now, I have been going and going and going and going and going and going and going, like the Energizer Bunny, as a vocation, as a career, full time. So I've been doing this for nearly 15 years, but really for the past 6 or 7, full time, professionally, nonstop. And what has begun to happen is I have started to hit a wall. I've started to hit a wall in my mediumship, and I just want to be very sort of vulnerable and open about this, because there are going to be points on your path where you hit a wall. Now, this to me kind of goes back to November. I sort of had a little personal shake-up to my personal life, and that was around Thanksgiving. And then right after that I got the flu, which I never used to get the flu. And then December I got the flu again. And then January I got the flu again. And psychically, I can always work psychically. It doesn't take a lot of energy. It's just a natural thing that I was born with. However, mediumistically, it has really impacted me. And on some level, I know I have to kind of take a break. I have to take a step back. So it's kind of ironic that the class that I'm going to be teaching in Lilydale this summer, late summer, is going to be overcoming, troubleshooting, overcoming obstacles in your mediumship, because I've really sort of hit this impasse of since I've been sick, and even though I'm not sick anymore, my body is still very, very run down. My power, we always talk about building power, has been so focused on trying to get my body, my physical wellness back where it needs to be, that I haven't had the energy to have good or clear or efficient spirit communication. And it's frustrating. It's very frustrating, especially when you work for yourself and you depend on what you do to make a living and to pay your bills. But that's one thing too that has really caused me to kind of take a step back and evaluate. When I started doing this when I was a teenager, I loved it. I still love what I do. But when you start doing something, and this is why I'm encouraging you not to rush into hanging your shingle, when you take that thing that you love, that you're passionate about, and it becomes something that you have to do to put food on the table, the joy is not the way that it used to be. I still find joy in what I do, but it's become less of a, it has kind of taken some of that passion out of it. And that's why we have to, if this is something, a path that we're choosing to go into, we have to remember to have balance, that we are body, mind, and spirit. My thing is, I'm a very mental, intellectual person, and some people would say I'm not emotional. I'm a Capricorn. It's not that I believe that I'm unemotional. I believe that I'm very objective in my dealing with emotion, because I'm usually dealing with other people's emotion. And so we have to remember to not do like I've done, and we have to remember to take care of ourselves and invest in ourselves. And so I've spent so much of my time enmeshed eating, breathing, sleeping, mediumship, spiritualism, psychic phenomena, and my work, that you really have to say, wait a minute. You have to remember, and you have to stop and reevaluate sometimes and say, okay, who am I outside of this? Because in the very first class that we ever did, we talked about the importance of natural law. We talked about many different natural laws. And one of the natural laws is law of balance, law of correspondence. Law of correspondence says, as above, so below. So if something is affecting me in one area, spiritually, it's affecting me physically. And if something is affecting me physically, it's affecting me spiritually. And so if I am depleted on a personal level, on some impact, it's going to affect my spiritual connection. Or if I'm depleted spiritually, as the majority of Americans are, it's going to impact their physicality, which is why so many people are sick. We are body, mind, and spirit, and we have to remember those three aspects. And so a big lesson for me is stepping back and saying, I have to have some sort of interest, some sort of passion, some sort of things outside of this that feed my spirit. Because if I'm not spiritually nourished, I am not in a position to spiritually nourish other people, or to be the bridge through which other people can be spiritually nourished through these connections with their loved ones. So another thing I want to talk about, that being said, is one, that's why I've really been focusing more on the teaching lately, is because I have to do a different aspect of the work while I'm recharging my batteries and getting well. But regardless of whether you just run yourself down like I've done, or if you're just going through the flow, mediumship has natural waverings and fluctuations. And there are going to be times where you are, like I said, you are going to feel like you hit a wall, and that's normal. That's normal. There's a really wonderful book called Medium by Costanza Morningstar, and that was put out probably 3 years ago through Llewellyn. And one of the things that I really love is I love the way that she teaches. It resonates very much in the ways that I myself teach. But she talked about something in her book that I hadn't seen put quite in the same way by any other teacher. And she talks about the cycles of development. And so that's one of the things that I sort of extracted from her writings and her teachings, and have begun to incorporate into my own teachings. And so in her cycles of development, she talks about how we all go through these energetic periods, these cycles, in regards to our mediumship growth. The first growth is expansion. And when we're in the phase of expansion, it's usually when we're in the beginning. Expansion is very much when we've just learned that we can do what we do, and we're excited about it, we're passionate about it, we're on fire for it. Plus, we've had this power building our whole lives, this natural power that we might have had, that we might have been born with in being mediumistic by nature, and we've not used it up because we've not practiced it. So it's like we got a lot of gasoline in the tank when we first start, and then we start learning all these different things, and you're like, wow, I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this. So it's this rapid growth, and it's often steady growth. Very much in the beginning, we start taking classes, we start sitting in circles, we really begin to see ourselves blossom. The second phase that Morningstar describes is the phase of consolidation. So consolidation is contentment. You've figured out what you're capable of, you do it, you're able to do it well, and you reach a certain level of consistency. You're maintaining the accomplishments that you've achieved, and you just ride that way for a while. And then we start to hit sort of that third phase that we go through, which is the phase of rest. And rest states that we sort of hit this plateau. Sometimes we hit stagnation. Sometimes we even hit resistance. Sometimes our own bad habits come up, our own bad mediumship habits. Sometimes we just sort of feel like I can't go any further. We feel like I've peaked. I know I've had that fear lately. Before spirits really kind of beat me over the head with, hey, you got to take a step back and rest because you are just running on fumes. And then, and this is the most uncomfortable of all the states, is contraction. So contraction is this feeling that you're getting worse, this feeling almost that you're regressing and not connected at all. But the really important thing to remember is when you are, as I'm in right now, quite honestly, these phases of kind of somewhere in between, the rest plateau and contraction, is that after contraction, we're right back to expansion. And always, for the rest of our lives, as long as we're working in mediumship, we're going to cycle continuously through those different phases. And it depends on all sorts of things. It depends on our environment. It depends on our emotional health. It depends on how we're taking care of our physical body. It depends on how spirit is choosing to work with us and the lessons that our soul kind of came in to learn. But we're always going to cycle through those. And so know that when things don't feel like they're going right, you're the slingshot and you're being pulled backwards. But it can only go backwards so far before you're launched forward again. So take some solace in that. When you're in that dark night of the soul, especially in regards to being of service on the path of mediumship, you're getting ready. You know, things seem like they're falling apart. They're getting ready to fall into place. And that's the thing that's most important to remember. I also wanted to read one more thing to you, which was back in the day there was an English trance medium by the name of Maurice Barbanel, and he became very well known. Actually, his spirit guide became much more well known than actually his medium, Silver Birch, for the philosophies that came through in his trance states. And I came across a quote one time, and it's so interesting to me what he put in here, because I talked about how the primary guide I worked with name is Thomas, and how it shows up in the oddest of places, and I doubt all the time, and this whole doubting Thomas sort of thing. And that's one of the things that kind of comes up in this. But it's Silver Birch's advice to a medium for those who experience doubt from time to time. Keep trying, do not give in. Despair is not good for you. It produces blackness, in which help cannot shed its light. I am optimistic always because I had the privilege of seeing the sublimity of how the natural law works. I know they will fulfill themselves. Man can hinder and delay, but he cannot prevent the power of spirit from increasing its beneficence in your world, finding new bridgeheads, consolidating them, building lighthouses of the spirit to shed their rays and guide travelers out of darkness and sorrow into the illumination that we offer. Do not be afraid of the challenges that come your way. Accept them, and know that the power of spirit will enable you to triumph as a result. Your name is not Thomas, you should not doubt. Blessed are they who have seen and heard. Theirs is the great privilege of having insight and glimpses into the wondrous life that is around and about them. It is filled with beings whose desire is only to serve, who want nothing for themselves but seek to help people who feel helpless. That is the task on which all are engaged. I am aware of human fallibility, of its doubts and fears, but you will learn gradually that when you place your complete confidence in the power, which has revealed its glories, beauties, radiance, strength, and guidance, it will not fail. It can be said that many have failed us. It cannot be said that we have failed them. I repeat, you cannot measure what you are doing. You are helping souls find themselves when they did not think it was possible. How sad it is to behold millions who are unaware of who and what they are, blind and deaf to spiritual realities. They have lost their way and live in a morose, floundering all the time because they cannot tread paths of certainty. Because of what we know, let us be aware of our responsibility to be available to service those who come to us, to offer them light in their darkness. So with that, I'm going to bring this week's lesson to a close. And remember your homework for identifying evidence, but then sort of asking, what reason have you shown up? For what reason do you come? And then we'll talk about that. And next week, we're going to get more into the subtleties and the nuances of the mechanics and the what's the word that I'm looking for? The process, I guess, for lack of better words, of spirit communication and message work. So I thank you all. I appreciate you all. Please send me some good energy and some good juju, and I will see you guys at the same time next week.